Welcome to 5 Good Minutes. You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Galatians with Kurt Bjorklund.
Galatians 6, end of 5, chapter 6, are really about the spiritual life, about the gospel-healed life versus the other approaches. And I've said that chapter 6, the end of chapter 5, beginning of chapter, or all of chapter 6, really deals with how we can get down two different extremes and end up in a place where we are going off of the path into a ditch, if you will. And today I want to just look at chapter 6, verses 2 through 5. It says, "Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he's something," here the note to pride again, "when he's nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. For each will have to bear his own load." So you have to bear your own load, but yet you have to bear the burdens of one another in order to fulfill the law of Christ. So let each one test their own work. What is going on here? Well, the ditches, if you want to follow my train of thought, on one side is to try to rescue people, and on the other side is refusing burden. To rescue people is to become almost codependent, where you take on people's burden in such a way that you become their savior rather than pointing them to the Savior. And to refuse somebody's burden is to determine that you don't want to be bothered, that you are responsible for you, they're responsible for them, and you never come to a burden. Now, in some ways, this is very similar to verse 1 about the if somebody's caught in a transgression, restore this person. But here, the idea isn't so much a transgression as much as a help. And so the gospel or the spiritual person will be willing to take a burden without taking on the responsibility of being a savior, without feeling as if somehow your way of doing things is the way that is the only way out for them. In other words, you're willing to help without bearing ultimate responsibility. Now, this is harder than it sounds. If you have kids, you know how this goes, how you want to help them. But sometimes the temptation is to say, well, I'm going to take full responsibility, full ownership for what it is that they're doing. Dietrich Bonhoeffer puts it this way. He says, "We need the word of grace to come to us through the lips of fellow Christians. We can't do it alone." And so the point of this is that God has given us this sense of saying, I want you to be willing to take on somebody else's burden, but yet not to take full responsibility. Again, the ESV Study Bible's notes here, to bear one another's burden, is helpful. It says, the supreme imitation of Jesus, the ultimate burden bearer, Romans 15, 1 through 3, he has even gone to the length of taking mankind's sin, Galatians 1:4, and the curse of the law upon himself, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Though Paul insists that the Galatians are free from obeying Jewish ceremonial laws, this does not mean they are free from all of God's moral requirements. The law of Christ, in a broad sense, means the entire body of ethical teaching that Jesus gave and endorsed. But in a specific sense here, it probably refers to the command to love one's neighbor as oneself, which, if followed fully, will result in obeying the rest of God's moral law. So my question today for you is, when you're presented with needs, do you run from it or overly take it on and become the savior? Or are you willing to step into it, well, not over-identifying, but not abdicating the responsibility? That is the call here. And a gospel-healed identity will be able to say, I understand that God is my Savior. I can point people. I can't save them myself. And I have a responsibility, but it's not ultimately just on me, because there is a God who is sovereign over everything, and he decides what needs to ultimately happen.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.